Money is not neutral. It carries culture, history, and expectations.
Join us for honest conversations about the real costs behind how we live, love, give, and just survive in this complex world.
Money. It is not black or white.
Powered by GoTime.
Inna Mapalomaku.
And I'm Maya Fisher-French. Welcome to our podcast.
Now, Maya, on this podcast, we talk about culture and the intersection between culture and money, right? And today we are touching on a topic, I think when your parents are younger, you hardly think about it. But as they get older and you see that they're not as strong as they used to be, you start thinking about it. Will your parent move in with you, or will they move to a retirement home? And one of the things that brought up this conversation, Maya, was the fact that you went to your mother's retirement village and you noticed something, that there weren't people of color there.
No.
Where are our Black Indian families keeping their aging parents?
Exactly. And it was very interesting because we were going around looking at retirement villages with my mom. And I actually asked the estate agent. And the estate agent said to me, sometimes we'll get a non-white couple, a black couple, colored or Indian, and they'll look around and they like it. But the feedback we get is we just don't feel this is our community. And I think this is very powerful. So I think there's two aspects that I want to unpack here. One is there a cultural difference? Do we, perhaps in my community, look at retirement villages as a solution? Whereas perhaps in a black culture, for example, you'll say, gosh, I'd never send my parents to a retirement village. Or is it that they don't feel comfortable in an environment where they're not represented? And I think that's very interesting. I mean, how would your parents feel about a retirement village?
Oh, my mother would never go.
Why?
Absolutely not. I think specifically my mom, when she thinks about retirement villages, she thinks that you have lost your independence. It means that you are right at the end of it all. And so she's still fiercely independent. She wants to be part of a community. She wants to get involved in the church. She wants to get involved with youth around where we stay, that sort of thing. So I feel like for her, she would feel secluded. And for her, she's always said, it feels like, then what are you doing? What value are you bringing into people's lives if you're just sitting there, the day kind of starts? So I think that's her perception of a retirement village. Whereas with my dad, I think he would love the convenience of it all. And yet my mother does not have any of that. Yeah. So I think it's how they perceive it, number one. But also with us, I would never send them there because why would you do that? These people raised you, nourished you, nurtured you. Why would you just send them off? So it would never be an option for us. Neither one of my siblings ever to send them to a retirement
And I think
village.
that's so that to me there is something in that. There is a cultural thing about and even within white communities, there are certain communities where it's not acceptable to send your parents to retirement villages. They comes to live at home with you. You look after her. She's part of it. And when I discussed that with my mom, because my sister was once said to me, oh, well, she can come live with me. I can put her in a little cottage or whatever. And my mom was like, I don't want to live with my kids. I want to live with people my age that I can do activities with. So she saw it differently. She thought coming to live with her children was the last thing she wanted to do. She said, well, you're going to have your lives. You're going to be busy doing your thing. And I'll just be stuck at home knitting, doing what? What am I going to do? So it was a very different perspective. And when we did discuss retirement villages with her, there was definitely a resistance in the beginning. So when she was younger, I remember when she turned 70, she said to me, I'm putting my name down at a retirement village. So when I'm 80, I'll move in. Well, come 80, she wasn't planning on moving into any retirement village. And I think it was the sense of I'm admitting I'm old. I'm admitting I need help.
There we go.
And then she got a back problem and it started to become difficult to stay in the house that she was in. And that was kind of became the catalyst. But I must tell you, and it's happened to my mom and every single friend of mine whose parents have resisted and not wanted to go to a retirement village and that have then gone, have been so happy.
Now they're enjoying it.
Loving it. My mother, I have to make an appointment to see my mother. My mother is off. She goes and does her water aerobics. She does Pilates. She's part of Mayong now, Mayong club. They have a lunch club. They go to plays in the evening at Monte Cassino there. She's living a full and active life. So I think there is a perception issue there as well. And I suppose it also depends. I think there was a time, maybe like 30 years ago, where you kind of went to the old age home and everyone was just sitting there
just
looking old, right?
Looking old, yes.
And now they are far more lifestyle estates and that kind of thing. So I think that is shifting, but I still have friends whose parents will not move into a retirement.
I mean, even just that conversation amongst you as siblings, I think it's a very hard one that people don't even want to go there, because if you are the one who brings up that conversation, what kind of a son, daughter are you?
And I think there is the sense, and I do wonder sometimes if my mom didn't feel a little pushed by us, because we were worried about her. So we were like, she was quite far. She lived an hour away from my sister, and we were worried. Like, if she falls, if something happens to her, who's going to be there to help her? And so I think it was for our need as well to know that she's safe, that we wanted her to. And I think that she did feel a bit of pressure from us. And that is difficult. It is a difficult situation.
I will give you an example with my father-in-law. He's turning 80. We're going to have a beautiful celebration. He's a wonderful, wonderful human being. He stays by himself. He refuses to move into an old age home. He's still there in Soweto, and he is fiercely, fiercely independent. He cooks by himself. He is very active. But one of the things he did say, there are 2 entrances to the house, one to the back of the living area, one to the kitchen. He does not use the kitchen anymore because it has a couple of steps, and he said he almost slipped and fell one time. So you can understand also, we are starting to worry, to think to ourselves, goodness, is he managing? Will he manage in the future? But right now, it's not even a conversation we're having.
And I think it's maybe a conversation you can't have with him, but it's something you need to start thinking about, because you're going to get to a point where you're worried if he's fallen and no one's there to help him get up. And then is it now it's time for him to move, or do you bring in a carer? Do you bring in somebody in, or are there neighbors who can check in? So my mom lives in an estate. It's a retirement village, but it's an estate. So she has to, every morning, she has to push a button to let everyone know she's okay. So there's a constant...
That's clever.
Exactly. So there is this constant sort of... And I think that for me is the big thing is, are you okay?
Yeah.
Is there somebody who can help you if something happens? But it is also about isolation. So you're talking about a friend says, Dad, if he's in the community and people are seeing people every day and connecting, that's great.
And I mean, even the neighbors know him, so they know his movements even. And we have someone who checks in on him every day. If he hasn't seen him, he goes knocking and say, hey, are you up? Are you okay? But he also has a very good friend who every single day before he goes home just goes past there. So definitely there is a massive, massive sense of community that we have. And that, I think, puts our heart at ease.
And I think so it's all very situational. Like, if you're in that community already, it helps a lot. But if you're starting to find your parent isolated, and I've seen this a lot in many of my friends, where their parents don't have, they live on bigger properties. There isn't, and I mean, let's be honest, some of these white suburbs, there's a lot of big fences, right? They don't have that.
Good
community.
fences make good neighbors.
Yeah, except when you get old and you really need somebody to check in on you. So there's no one knows if that person's okay. And they start to get isolated because they're not driving anymore. They're just sitting at home. They need someone to come and take them to the shops. I think you need to look at it on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah. But also personality, as you mentioned earlier, because with my dad, on the other hand, he would love a community where, he is not at home by himself. He's doing all those things. There's convenience. He can go for tea. He can have conversation with people because he's not a very outgoing person. So that type of situation would work for him. But he is the type of person who wouldn't mind at all coming to stay with one of us. He loves taking care of the kids. He loves driving them. Whenever he's here, he says, no, don't worry, I'll go get them from school. And he takes massive pride in that. My mother, on the other hand, she is busy. She's got things to do and places to be.
So I suppose it is. But I suppose the important thing is having these conversations, even if I suppose just even to start having those conversations with your parents, like my mom did, like when she was 70, I'm going to move to a retirement village. She was very clear she didn't want to live with us, and very clear she didn't want to be a responsibility to us. But we've spoken about this in previous podcasts, this kind of sense of independence that you often do find. And like my mom's a very independent person, and there is no expectation on us as her children to look after her, which is very different.
Yeah.
Because in some cultures, there is an expectation. I'm now old. I'm going to sit down and my children will look after me.
Take care of.
And you may have that parent. So it is a difficult one.
Yeah. Okay. But then let's talk about if we came to a point where we have to take care of either my dad or my mom. And, I was thinking about it this preparing for the podcast, and I called my siblings, my sisters, and said, if we needed to stay with either mom or dad, who would take on that responsibility? And I asked this question knowing exactly who would take on that responsibility.
And who is it?
My older sister.
You knew.
I mean, even when I spoke to my middle sister, she was like, but of course, they would ship them off to the oldest one. And it's that older daughter syndrome, unfortunately, that she takes care of everyone. And, that responsibility would normally just fall on her. And I know even with her, she said, but would have to make a plan, make sure that they live with me. And so that says something about the oldest daughter, especially women, because you've seen here, I've not even included my brother in this conversation. But to show that the largest responsibility still falls on women to do the caretaking.
Without a doubt. In fact, it was quite interesting. There was a survey done in Scandinavia. Now, Scandinavia has one of the most equal parenting roles in the world. So men and women parent very equally there. So there isn't this thing about the mother being the main caregiver in the Scandinavian countries, but not for elderly. 80% of caregiving for the elderly is done by women. So, and I cannot think of any of my friends even where the husband looks after his own parent.
That's another layer.
He either has sisters who are doing it, or his wife gets involved. So I would agree. I would think it's a very true statement. And I would love to, if anyone listening to this says, actually, I, as the man, am involved, and I look completely after. Please let us know.
We may have your last to hear from you.
But it does fall. So I think that is an interesting one, and I want to unpack a little bit about how that's fallen in our family now. But before we get there, one of the things I think we've spoken about the physical care of our parents, like when they're getting old and things. But there's also I'm scared to use the word cognitive because it sounds like dementia or whatever. But what I mean is a slowing down. And that can often become an impact on finances. So I look at my mom now. I do all of her finances. I look after her medical aid. I help her with her banking. And I sort out all of that, her municipal accounts, her levies. And you do at some point need to start stepping in. And it's quite an important one to realize. And I think what I've seen when I look at my friends going through this, and it'd be interesting to see your observations from your experience, is that when it's the father or male, we are less likely to step in because they're less likely to ask for help. Yet the cognitive decline is happening. And I've got two friends who they did not know. And in fact, I have to tell you, it happened to my father. My father started to have cognitive decline without us understanding. So one friend, his parents retired with more than enough money. There was no problem. He's just discovered that his father has lost all of their money. Because he didn't know. He didn't know that he wasn't coping. And I've got and I have another friend as well who's had a very similar thing where suddenly they all thought the dad was managing the finances and he wasn't. Whereas I think the female mothers tend to ask for help more. And I think that's a very important thing to understand.
But I guess it goes back to we just assume also that they're okay. With us right now, Offence's dad, still in good shape. He takes care of everything. He was an accountant, so he's still quite sharp. My mom keeps all her ledgers, all of that. I know sometimes my dad tends to forget a little bit, but thankfully she's there to make sure that, okay.
But how old is she now?
My mom is turning 70 next year.
Yeah, she's still young. I feel my mom like getting to 80. By 80,
that's when
I would say for me, if I had that experience, it's sort of around 80 that things started to slide a bit.
Yeah. But I guess, again, it's just having those conversations and from this podcast, realizing, okay, what age are my parents? Do you still realize that are they sharp? If can sense that perhaps there are things that are not making sense, just step in. It might be difficult to have the conversation, especially for someone who's been fiercely independent all their lives, but just start nudging at those questions and saying, hey, are you coping with this? Are you coping with that? But for example, with my parents, they do not do online banking whatsoever. Every single time my mom will give me her login details and she'll be like, okay, pay this for me, do that for me. And we will, either myself or my two sisters will do that and be like, okay, done. But she will never, ever touch internet banking. Otherwise, she'll have to go into a bank and speak to someone.
So that is what I think is a really big issue, is that even if it's not cognitive decline, but it's simply the inability to keep up with technological change, which is happening so fast. I mean, my kids adopt their technologies much faster than I do. So what is happening, I think, in the financial industry is really bad for this, is they're pushing everything digital now. I want to tell you about my mom. My mom needed to sort something out with
A bank?
No, this was her health with a, I won't say the name of medical scheme. It's a very large medical scheme. And she,
Did you see how
she's slightly, she was a bit deaf. She's now got hearing aids. At that time, she didn't. And she was struggling to hear on the phone. So she climbed in a car. She drove an hour. She lived in Hartbeespoort. She drove an hour into Santa to go and see someone to help her sort out her medical aid. She gets there, she waits there, and they say, what do you know? No, this is a story. And they give her a phone. They will not speak to her. They will not see her in person. And that's ageist. I'm sorry, but that's the problem with it, is that it's, and this technology of driving everyone to digital, everyone onto banking apps, they don't want you in the branch. They're actively pushing you out of branches, and it's getting hard for elderly people. And I think that's part of why I've also had to step in. So why I do so much. And my mom actually knows what's going on with her bills. I mean, she writes everything down. She's very cognitive from that perspective. But it's the fear of, what if I make a mistake with my app? Of what if I fall for a scam? And we know for a fact that the scam is targeting elderly people because of their fear of digital devices. So I think we have a lot to put at the door, actually, of the financial industry as well.
No, absolutely, Maya. And I hope executives will see this, and
they won't, because it costs money. So people cost money. For my mom to go into the branch and talk to a woman at the branch, who she does have actually, it's a cost to the bank, and they're trying to keep costs low. They can't pass those costs on to pensioners because they've got even less money than anyone else. So I think this is a part of a challenge. But then, I always look at my mom and I think, what would happen if she didn't have me? What about all those people who don't have kids who can step in?
Maya, this is a horror story. I heard it from an Uber driver. He said he was taking an elderly man from one place to another, and they just started chatting, and he was weeping in the car because his lights had been turned off, his water had been turned off. Now he was attending to a court matter because he had brought this property thinking, this is my retirement plan, I'm just going to live here. Then because of the markets, I think his money was declining, so he couldn't pay his rates and taxes, he couldn't pay his levies, and they cut off all of those things. And he did not have children to help him. So that is a very scary thing for pensioners to start thinking about, actually, what would I do? Especially if you can realize that you don't have kids, maybe. Or perhaps sometimes you don't have a good relationship with your kids. That's another.
Well, you and I are good children, and we're not going to steal from our parents. But I mean, that's a very real fear. So now if I let my child help me with my banking, will they be taking money on my bank account? And sadly, that is a very, very real fear. But let's not go to the worst case scenario. But how do we? And I think this is an important thing. Is I think part of why we're having this conversation today is so that people listening who have parents saying, "Oh, I've got to start thinking about those things." So how do we have those conversations? And especially if your parents coming up to retirement, do you say, "Look, I'd really like to sit down with a financial planner and understand your finances, understand if I need to step in," because that's a big thing. So I'm coming across people who the parents say, "Oh no, everything's fine," and then suddenly 10 years into retirement, they don't have enough money. And then the kids are on the line at a time when they're trying to send their own children to university and all the rest. So sometimes knowing what that number looks like you can step in earlier. So you can say, as you say, you sit down with the financial planner who says, listen, if you can help supplement by 5,000 Rand a month or whatever, they'll be okay. And that's an easier thing to do than to be hitting a cliff where they run out of money completely, like this man who was crying in the Uber, and suddenly you're stepping in for 20,000 a month. So I think it's really important to be able to have those conversations.
And one of the conversations we've left out is the power of attorney.
Oh, power of attorney. Absolutely.
Power of attorney, because as your parents age, and you were talking about that cognitive decline, and sometimes dementia starts to happen, and trying to wind up that estate or even just running that person's life becomes impossible.
So
and
this is
huge financial burden.
This is a big gap in South African legislation. So we do not have an enduring power of attorney. We're one of the few countries in the world that does not have it. So an enduring power of attorney means that you take out the power of attorney when they're still cognitive. Like I have power of attorney for my mom on everything. But the minute she is no longer so if she gets dementia, for example, effectively that power of attorney falls away. And we would have to put her under curatorship. We'd have to go to court, and that can cost tens of thousands of rands to put her under curatorship. That's the law in South Africa. So obviously what one hopes is that it's not contested. So, and I think, if all your siblings are getting on and the sibling who has power of attorney is transparent, shows what's happening with the money and all of that, nobody needs to go and tell the authorities, right? Yes. And you all just wind it up and things get done.
Yes.
But if there is any dispute, let's take my scenario, for example, if my mother had to get dementia and my siblings decided that they were not happy with me being power of attorney, and then we would have to put the entire thing under curatorship. And another big one, for example, is, and this is really important, is that if somebody needs to sell their home to move into a retirement village or into frail care, and I remember, I want to get into costs of these things because I'm in the middle of all of that at the moment. If they need to move into frail care, and you have to sell the property, if they are not of cognitive mind, you can't sell the property.
Sure.
Because and then either there's got to be a power of attorney that nobody tells anybody there's cognitive decline, or you've got to go into curatorship. So it gets very complicated, and that's why these conversations need to start now, not when it's too late.
Yeah, when it's you're in.
And I mean, I think even if it's an interesting conversation, even for Offence's dad, he's 80, he's cognitive, everything's great. But what if you need to get to a point where you have to sell the house to support him in, even if he moves in with you, whatever, you need full-time carers. Often the property needs to get sold to fund that. How do you do that if the cognitive declines happen?
These conversations are so important.
This is why we have them.
Scary, but very important.
I think we're being honest. And, you want to be having these conversations when your parents are lucid about what could happen when, if. Yeah. I mean, those are really, really important.
Let's get into the costs now. Let's get to the
costs. So, we were talking about retirement villages, and, one of the big reasons people aren't in retirement villages is costs. It's really expensive. If I look at my mom and what it costs every month, so the levies. So my mom's bought her place, so she sold her house and she's got a place, so she owns it. But the levies are 7,000 Rand a month. The rates, the taxes, electricity, water, all the rest. She's looking at about 10,000 Rand a month to live there. That's before she's bought food, before she's put petrol in anything else. So for a lot of people, that is just a cost that's not. And this is, of course, when we talk about not having enough at retirement, you don't realize what it costs to actually just to keep your bills going. Yeah. So that's a really, really big cost. And I can see why for a lot of people, it's a lot more cost effective to say, well, let's take some of that money, build a granny cottage or an extra room and bathroom on our home and live there. It'll keep the costs down tremendously because it is expensive to move into these retirement.
Yeah. Now, that's quite a lot of money. And that is when someone is still okay. Let's talk about when someone is now frail. Perhaps they develop dementia and they need extra help.
Then the numbers just go absolutely insane. I was speaking to a friend actually recently whose mom had to be in an Alzheimer's unit for, because she was obviously unable to look after herself. And 40,000 a month. 40,000 a month it cost. Now, I was actually saying to her, we were having this debate about, I said, I don't even want to be around costing my family 40,000 Rand a month. We were having, and she said to me, but you've got the finances to do it. And I think that's important. Remember, it is 40,000 a month, but that's it. That's all food, all nappies, all everything. But it's a lot of money. Now, if you as the person, and the elderly person doesn't have that money, the family has to chip in. And that's where it gets really expensive. And then, so you've got that as an option, or you're going to need a full-time carer at home. And that can cost you maybe 20 to 30,000. So it's not much cheaper. To have somebody coming into your home because you need somebody there all the time. Or, and this is a really big one, and I was reading such an interesting article about this in the New York Times. This is a problem in the US where women are having to give up their careers to stay at home and look after their parents because they can't afford, in the US, these costs are even higher. They cannot afford a full-time carer for their parents. So who gives up the career? The woman. And these are very, very real issues. So the cost.
But also, can you imagine the knock-on effect of giving up your job because now you don't have an income and you have escalating expenses. Now you have one income, perhaps. The knock-on effects, Maya, are just astounding.
Absolutely. I think, again, as we're saying, these are conversations we need to be having now, understanding, because we don't know what that health is going to be like. Yeah. And even for ourselves, I mean, preparing for my own retirement, making sure that I have those funds available so that if I do need to move into a facility, I'm not putting that burden on my kids.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, Maya. Yes. And I mean, going back to why perhaps like people don't do it, I mean, they just have not saved enough. Traditionally and historically, there is just not enough retirement savings. So that is number one, but also that cultural, which you alluded to, that no one even talks about moving into a retirement home altogether, but it is very expensive.
I want to ask you, would you move into a retirement village one day?
I mean, right now, my answer would be no. It would be no. But I don't know. I'm not in my 50s, 60s. Maybe I might just change my mind. And maybe things will start changing also. If I could perhaps move in with my siblings, with a couple of friends, that would maybe make me change my mind. But there's some TikToks where you have elderly people having tons of fun in these places. So it depends, and we'll see.
You're talking about things would need to change. I mean, I think we're talking about demographics as well. And there's a great book, Malcolm Gladwell's Revenge of the Tipping Point. Remember, he wrote Tipping Point many years ago. Now he's written another one a couple of years ago called The Revenge of the Tipping Point. And in there, he looks at what is that number that shifts things. And he comes up to a number of 30%. So and he spoke about representation of women on a board, for example, in business. Women only have a voice if they reach 30% of that board. And it's the same with non-white, whatever, if you're demographics, right? So there was an experiment in Palo Alto, I think it was, where they took a town and a neighborhood, and they made it 30%, a third, I think it was Hispanic, African-American, and white. And that community thrived. And there was no racial issues. Everyone got on. And they said because each person felt heard and represented. So that's the number. We need to get, in order for that to change, in order for retirement villages to become more attractive to non-white people, we need a higher representation of people, of those communities in those retirement villages. So, and the number is 30%.
30%. So we just need to build our own and have 30.
30.
And everyone will feel like, okay, they are living within a community.
Within a community, exactly. So that's quite a
very interesting one.
Yeah.
Okay, so now, Maya, we have spoken about the cultural differences and just preparedness to have these conversations. But also another one is the grant in South Africa. The retirement grant in South Africa is just devastating. And that's why so many people have to step in with their parents. What is the grant right now sitting at?
That's a good question. It's about just over 3,000 Rand, I think it is. I mean, it's not enough. I remember, I must tell you, I remember once filling up my car and thinking my petrol bill was nearly equal to the old age pension grant. So I think it's a big issue. But also what I'm seeing, this is a very interesting one that I'm seeing as well. So people will come to the end of they will retire from work. but they didn't earn a lot, okay? But they retire and they may get like an 800,000 Rand retirement payout. And then they may get the social grant. But maybe they've got 800,000 Rand. And what they do is they give it to the kids. And they say to the children, I'm giving it to you. I'm going to move in with you and you will look after me with that money. Or I'm going to stay in my home. I'm going to go back to Eastern Cape or wherever. I'm going to live in my home there. But you must pay all my bills and everything. And there's this thing, the thought that 800,000 Rand or R1 million Rand's a lot of money. And there isn't really an understanding that doesn't go very far. I mean, if those kids had to invest that money and get, maybe 6% interest from it, it's not really going to be doing much. Or I suppose they'll be using the capital, but it really doesn't go very far. And there's this kind of like, but I gave you R1 million Rand, so now you're going to pay for everything.
Yeah.
So I find that a big one. But yes, I mean, the social grant is, it keeps the wolf from the door, but it's not really going to cover medical costs because in many of these cases, you've got to go private. The government hospitals are a disaster in certain areas. So yeah, I mean, it is about, and we've spoken about this before, generationally, many young Black people are carrying the costs of their parents because they did not have the opportunity to accumulate wealth.
No, absolutely. And I think for me, just to end off, going back to younger people, if you have your retirement funds, if you have your pension or provident fund, do not touch those funds. Pizza, as I often say. You keep on touching the savings pot. One day, these conversations are going to be so extremely important for you, and your kids are going to have to start thinking, how are we going to support this person? So please, if you can, by all means, just leave those retirement funds alone.
I think so. I think that is, we don't want our children to be the ones having to support us in retirement. We want them to be able to grow and to develop intergenerational wealth. And that's one of the ways of doing it. It's not passing that on. And then I think also, if you have parents who are in their 70s, start having the conversations now and with your siblings. And who's going to look after them? In our family, I do all the finances. My sister who lives near my mom does a lot of the physical stuff, takes her around and helps her with her gym and her healthcare and her doctor visits. How does that look in your family? And start having those conversations. And I think it's important rather than waiting till it's too late.
Yes, no, absolutely. And that's why we have this podcast.
That's why we have this podcast.
Start these conversations.
And please join the conversation. Tell us how you feel. Tell us about conversations you're having with you. If you are a young Black person or a Black woman of 50 years old, would you consider a retirement village if it represented you?
Oh, yeah.
I would love to. I would love to hear back from you. So thank you. Yeah, after a great conversation.